Hey everybody, Alex Terrace here. So I'm going to give you a walkthrough of the AOScan technology, and this is going to be broken up into different segments because the software program, the device, is very multifaceted, has a lot of features, and the video could probably be easily 2 hours plus just to kind of cover everything. So we're just going to kind of segment them out. So after you watch the video, have a look in my channel and see what is number 2 and number 3 and number 4. I'll just break it up by parts. And of course, if you have any questions about this, you can find me on my website, healthhacksreview.com. That is in the bottom description. So if you have questions, again, you can just send me an email or whatever, and I can give you some more information, of course. And anyway, so yeah, I am, if you don't know who I am, basically I'm somebody who spent the last 15 years researching all kinds of wellness technologies, devices, anything from medical devices to cutting edge supplements, you name it. So just kind of see what's the latest and greatest out there, compare and contrast, and kind of put it through a variety of different research steps and processes to kind of always be looking for what's the most effective or the best thing for a specific health goal, and also kind of protocols. What are different synergistic modalities paired with different sorts of products to accomplish certain results. There's a lot of information out there. So I'm kind of a curator, if you will, concierge, consultant for around 150 different health companies at this point. And so in all of that, in the field or the area of what's called bioresonance technologies or bioresonance modalities, therapies, there is several different things that have been around for quite some time in development. So there's everything from like NES Health to Skios and Indigos, and so those are some that you may have heard of, for example. There's Bicom, you may have heard of that one. There's Genius Insight and Genius Apps, you can check out that. Totally forgetting the company name though, that's funny. But anyways, yeah, there's a lot out there that people have been exposed to. Most of them are usually more electrodermal resistance assessments. So they actually have your hand on some type of electrode pad, something like that, and they're measuring the impedance or resistance of very, very subtle, small microcurrent flow through your nervous system. I don't know, maybe 90% of them are like that. There's a couple exceptions, of course, where they are doing a different sort of assessment that you could say is maybe non-invasive or does not require that sort of contact with an electrode. And I will say that in general, in my comparisons of the ones that do have the physical contact, they're all kind of actually quite different than one another. But I would say that give or take, their accuracy is anywhere from like 30 to 60%. Sometimes they're a little higher in some specific things, but for the most part, that's a fair average. So usually how most practitioners are working with those types of technologies is it's just another source of health assessment data that they're then incorporating into other diagnostic methods. Maybe they're sending off for lab results or something like that for the liver or digestion. And, they're just looking for other things. Maybe they're palpating. Maybe they're doing traditional Chinese medicine trained, right? Or muscle response testing. It's a little more in depth. Maybe the style they're doing. Every practitioner is different, right? So part of the goal is, even if you're not a practitioner, is getting clear information and as much information as we can about what's going on in the body, but of course trying to organize it in a way so that we can more easily come up with an assessment of where are my priorities, and also tracking things. If you do a new product or modality or whatever you're working on, how's it going, right, along the way? 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, whenever you're doing your follow-up visits or follow-up tests. So bioresonance is, for the most part, an energetic way, let's just say, based on the principles of biophysics, to take an assessment, again, of more the energy status of cellular function, immune system function, could be brain functions. And we could even fall into the category of like an MRI, if we want to go super mainstream for a second, or an EEG or EKG, or maybe even heart rate variability, which is maybe becoming more popular now when they're doing like cardiovascular stress tests and things like that. And like HeartQuest, for example, is pretty good. So there are, sidebar comment, there are a lot of HRV softwares out there that go like way off into left field, trying to like make up all these insights into the body, which are not really proven in any research at all. It just looks really cool, and it gives you information that's not really backed up by really anything legitimate. But there are some really good, helpful information with that. So yeah, there's those types of more mainstream, energetic ways of reading things in the body. A lot of even mainstream doctors don't quite fully grasp just how physicsy, just how much an MRI, for example, relies on physics, and really by even some aspects of physics would be considered to be impossible in terms of how it's getting the imaging in there. So really quite sophisticated. When you kind of get into the understanding of what it's doing, you'll then actually have a better idea for how there can be other ways to, let's say, do imaging in the body, but spit that information out, not necessarily visually, but we could spit it out in other values that may be more like in text, for example, or maybe like an animated image, a diagram. So like in our case of AO scan, we use different sorts of diagrams, 3D diagrams, lab panel sorts of stuff. And you'll see here as I do a walkthrough what those reports and things look like. So in my assessment of these different bioresonance technologies, some of what I've mentioned so far, some of the other ones that are out there. In my research, AOScan, which is the company Solex, by the way, so Solex LLC, and there's all the kind of links to those companies below in the description if you're curious checking it out. But in my research, they ended up creating a software and device that is kind of the most thorough in terms of how it evaluates the body. So a lot of them don't really go into a lot of detail, and you'll see just how detailed this goes into things. So you have a lot of different data points, functionally speaking, in all the different areas of the body, 120 different organ systems, for example, 3,000 different items total. So nobody really gets that detailed, which is really nice, certainly helpful. And also the accuracy, it's the best I've found so far. So again, a lot of these types of technologies are very helpful. I always recommend owning at least something versus nothing, whether it's at home or in your practice. But again, the question to really then look in, and it takes a while to evaluate this. In my position, it's easier. I deal with a lot of businesses and practitioners and all that kind of stuff, so I can follow up with a lot of people and do my due diligence. But this one averages more like 80 to 90+%, depending on a few variables, somewhere within that range. Very solid. In fact, if you look at other mainstream tests, even just like your normal type of lab panel lab tests, this actually is functionally more accurate than anything else. And based on even the mainstream tests, significantly more accurate. So we get feedback all the time from practitioners that are like, yeah, this just came from like literally a couple days ago, pretty well known like addiction center in Florida, very well connected, doing awesome alternative work there. And they were like, we just did this blood workup on like 3 of our patients, and then we did like our scan with AO scan as they were kind of trialing it, and they were just like spooked out because it was like 90% right on it. They were just like, this is exactly what we found in our blood tests. That's pretty crazy. So this technology, even if you don't fully grasp the science, and I'm not going to get too much into the science on this call, you can always do future calls and things like that. You can always email me if you really kind of want to understand the world of biophysics. But seeing and experiencing is believing. So whether this is totally new to you, or you're kind of familiar with frequency types of modalities, things like that, the field of biophysics or bioenergetics, even PEMF, just anything like that, if you're already familiar with that, using it and experiencing it for yourself, that's what makes believers, truly. When you see something and you just cannot deny it, and it's repeatable and it happens again and again and again. If you see right on par with blood tests, I mean, it speaks for itself. You know what I mean? Like it's it can't be that fake. You know what I mean? It can't be that much of a coincidence. So again, even if you don't quite fully believe this, and it's always good to be skeptical and discerning, always, when you're evaluating things. This is a technology that's extremely low cost. That's the other thing. So it's something at least worth trialing out and seeing for yourself, just proving it to yourself. Again, you don't have to get fully into the science. If it works, right? And you don't even have to tell your patients per se, or you don't have to tell your family or this or that. You can secretly use it for your own benefit, just to gather that information. So I will say this is that by the same methodology that we're able to get information, we can also modulate those same functions. So one of the key principles to understand, we'll get into the walkthrough here very quickly here, I just wanted to touch on this, is that what we have in our database is we have 122,000 blueprint frequencies. Where did that really come from? So Space Agency in Russia, when you do the research into bioresonance technologies, you will find that one of the greatest research expenditures, budget-wise, happened in Russia in the 70s and 80s. Space race, both in the United States and Russia, ended up creating a lot of great technologies that trickled down in many different areas because they put so much money towards it. So it was to the tune of at least $500 million. Some say a little bit more, and that was in the 70s and 80s. That's a lot of good money, especially when there was no red tape at all. It was just like, we need you to create some epic stuff. And what was some of the parameters of how AOScan, some of these frequencies came about? One was, of course, you're going into space, right? So you're in a very different electromagnetic environment. The body is going to be bombarded by a lot of stressful things to the body, right? Number one, you don't have the atmospheric protection, things like that. You don't have a lot of magnetic field supportive aspects that we could talk all day long about, that you actually get exposed to coming from the core of the Earth that actually regulate different sorts of circadian processes, all kinds of stuff, reproduction, you name it. Okay, so there's all that. So when you're far away from Earth, you're bombarded by, even airline stewardesses and pilots, they get exposed to so much electromagnetic radiation. It's extremely hazardous and they have no idea, most of them. So there's that. We want to protect our astronauts. That was one goal. The other one was, hey, one of the most common things is obvious, keeping up bone density. So we saw whole body vibration machines that came out of that. We saw some other bone oscillators, Schumann frequencies, sorts of PEMF devices, different tricks to keep the bones strong. One thing is, in the early space race, the Russian astronauts walked off their first missions, no problem. Like, hey, we're in space for a while, whatever. And then when you saw those first astronauts come off in the United States, they were needed to be carried out. So it was interesting. Okay, Russia definitely is doing something different. Interesting. United States definitely looked into that very quickly, and they tried to catch up. Okay, but the point is, Russia was significantly ahead in the area of electromagnetic research. Always have been. Some would say at least 20 years, which is pretty good when you have a good budget. Anyways, so the other thing they wanted to do was, before you go into space, they're running a lot of vitals on the astronauts. They need to know these people are in top shape, top performance. How do they do when they're in a stressful environment? Are they feeling a little off today? In what way are they feeling off today? If they could have their lab of doctors up there on the craft, of course they would do that. Constantly keeping them in tune and making sure everything is good. That's impossible, obviously. So what they needed to do was, how are we going to remotely not just modulate, but test, monitor remotely these different vitals, biometrics, whatever, from our astronauts. So that is a big challenge, at least back then, to say hey, we need to come up with a remote way, right? When we're using radios to talk back and forth, right? So they were able to accomplish it. One of the fields that they tapped into was called radiosthesia or radionics. So I'll put that keyword below in the description of the video. So start to Google around on radionics. Radionics actually, it seemed a little out there initially, but when you really go back, and this is decades ago, it's been around a while, but when you really actually go back into it, there was a couple situations where it was put through some rigorous testing with, the European, United States, different board of different doctors, medicine, um, medical boards, etc. And they tested and they looked at it pretty rigorously and found it was legit. Like they were hoping that it would not work. They were hoping that it was not true. It was not possible. So just letting you know, like they found some legitimacy in being able to remotely influence somebody's biological parameters and or non-invasively test for somebody's biological parameters as well. Okay? So pretty well proven then. And then, so Russia tapped into that. They realized there was something there. Could we, however, build on a way to, instead of having a human user be the one that is working directly with connecting with the astronauts, where it's slow and there is some error, some room for human error more? Could we somehow do like programming, computer programming? Computers were just starting to become a little bit more accessible and usable at the time. So that was their thing. How do we incorporate radionics into computers and software and make that a thing? Okay, so this has this whole like program, computer, radionic aspect to the technology, which is kind of unique. And Russia really took it pretty far in that direction. They also did learn a lot from Germany. There is definitely a lot of German research here as well, incorporated into the technology. At the time, and I'm almost done with the wrap-up backstory here, they also, a lot of the core researchers, were taking research information from the field of bioenergetics, electrotherapy, you name it, from all of the top researchers, okay, at the time, not just your Royal Rife and your Tesla and like mainstream names like that, Lakovsky, things like that. There was a lot of others. And they just looked at everything that was accomplished for 150 years, and actually a little further than that if you're incorporating homeopathy as well, things like that. And they just rolled it all together, and they just wanted to find what actually could be tested, could be very accurate, and how would they improve upon those things and roll them all together. So they had a lot of money to bring all of these things together instead of keeping them like niche modalities. Again, they wanted to take everything and group it together, which kind of starts to make the unique foundation of the beginnings of what created AOScan and makes it again so unique. It's not just like another PEMF device or direct current, microcurrent, something like that, right? This is rolled together many things. Even again, the principles of homeopathy, radionics, pretty cool to have that all in there. So by the way, take a back step. If you are not really familiar with the actual principles of how homeopathy works, that's another thing you need to go and just spend 30 minutes reading on. There's plenty of information out there. Go on some of the main boards of homeopathy in Europe, United States, Canada, etc., because they usually kind of pull together all the relevant studies and information. And I will just tell you, 200 years plus, really that's more where there was a lot of things where mainstream medicine, Western medicine even, came out of homeopathy. If you are really a more skeptical person and you want to see rigorous studies, there are more double-blind studies historically that are very rigorous, very peer-reviewed in homeopathy. Okay, so number one, go prove to yourself that it's legit. Then ask yourself, okay, now that I know it's legit, it works. How does it work, right? And then that's when you'll see, oh, okay, there's a whole world here on the biophysics, bioenergetic level of that I didn't fully realize. Now that I realize that kind of linking sequence, AOScan makes a lot more sense. Okay, so we have some of those same energetic principles that you could say, oh, it's in the field of homeopathy or in this or that. Okay, that is right here in this technology. So that's why I would say do a little bit of your homework there. Start there because homeopathy is a little more mainstream, something you may have heard of course, and then work up from there. And again, when you dive into this, it's going to make a lot more sense of how this is possible, and then incorporating technology into how all this works on a biophysics level. So these blueprint frequencies, so in Russia, they basically tried to come up with like these equivalents of like, okay, I got this function in the liver, I got this function in the liver, but like what's the resonant frequency range for those functions, okay? And that's what they would basically record down, all right? So that's mainly what we're talking about here. Only exceptions are like in the case of toxins, pathogens. Uh, those also have their own energy signature, whatever. What you'll find though with this is not like oh it's 121.4 that does this hertz. There is that, but that's also like limited and not really totally realistic. So there is no, your average cell may have 10 million frequencies. Okay, it's a range, it's a bandwidth of frequencies. So to dial into like a magical hertz frequency, there might be some like frequency hertz that is more like a master frequency and consistently may help with something like in the field of microcurrent therapy or PEMF. Okay, that's true. That does happen. But we're really kind of looking much more broadly to influence in the body a wide range of functions. And your average cell is pretty freaking sophisticated. So there's a lot of frequencies in there. So part of the goal was how do you modulate the bulk majority of what's going on in there? So the key is really co-resonance within a range of frequencies. So in real time, even though we have some stored away things here, you got to look at it more like a series of 122,000 tuning forks, if you will, right? And we're trying to get other tuning forks in your body to resonate somewhere within that bandwidth of range, okay, to restore function. There's a lot more we could get into, but anyways, so it's really something that is both interpreting, okay, all these different signals, and it's also modulating. In the case of frequencies where things go way off, it's more like noise canceling technology. Go Google that real quick. What is noise canceling technology? Because when you look at that also is some of those principles are relevant to how this works. But that's not all that we do here either. Okay, and that's just some of the function. Okay, in terms of how it works. The goal being homeostasis, restoring homodynamic functions, communication from the brain to the rest of the body, self-regulatory feedback loops. Okay, there's all kinds of things we could dive into. All right, so here it is. So they rolled together really several different types of technologies into this, and it kind of grew over time. So when Energy in Utah, they got a hold of they got the license from the Russian government space agency. They continued to improve upon the accuracy, improve upon what it could do, and even roll together some other types of technologies that they found along the way that they found were very supportive, very synergistic. So this has actually become like a multi-product, one way, a multi-modality technology. So it is actually quite unique in what it's become. So yeah, that's it for kind of the beginnings of a little bit of where it began. And in the next video, we'll actually get into the walkthrough of the different features and programs.